November 16, 2019, a Kenya Defense Forces officer walks detectives to a patch of disturbed earth at a cemetery in Thigito, just outside a military air base. He is not a witness. He is a man who buried them. 3 bodies stacked on top of one another. A mother, her 10-year-old daughter, and a 5-year-old son. The man who led police there was her husband and the children's father.
This was infanticide and femicide. These are offenses which have become very rampant in our country.
This is a case that would take 7 years to conclude in a court because prosecutors would later prove the plan had been set in motion 3 days before a single body entered the ground. Our story begins on October 25, 2019. 31-year-old Joyce Siombua lives in Nairobi with her 2 children, 10-year-old Shanice and 5-year-old Prince Michael. She is traveling to Nanyuki to visit her husband, Major Peter Mugure, a serving Kenya Defense Forces officer stationed at the Kimpia Air Base. The couple had become estranged, but this visit appeared to everyone around them to be an attempt at reconciliation. They arrived safely and are seen entering the military air base. To anyone watching, they looked like an ordinary family trying to rebuild their relationship. But what was not known to many was that 3 days earlier, Major Mugure had quietly made another journey, one that would later become one of the prosecution's strongest pieces of evidence. According to records produced in court, he had visited a burial site maintained by a sewerage company, a place prosecutors argued had already been selected before anyone ever knew there would be bodies to bury. That single visit would later become a crucial piece in proving premeditation. The following day, October 26th, Joyce, the children, and Mugure are seen leaving the base together before stopping for lunch at Kilimara Springs Hotel. It's the last confirmed sighting of Joyce Siombua and her children alive. After that lunch, Joyce never leaves the military base again. Days pass. There is no phone call, no message, no explanation. Her family grows increasingly anxious. They call repeatedly. Their calls go unanswered. As concerns turn into fear, missing persons reports are filed. Looking back, this is often the most painful stage in many murder investigations. The period between someone disappearing and the moment investigators begin treating the disappearance as a possible crime. Slowly, an uncomfortable question begins to emerge. What does Major Mugure know that he is not telling you? On November 15, 2019, detectives make their move. Major Mugure is arrested. Remarkably, this happens a full day before the bodies are recovered. Investigators clearly believe they are already dealing with something far more serious than a missing persons case. The investigation then takes an unexpected turn. A young man named Collins Pamba, a 21-year-old employee at the senior officers' mess within the military base, begins cooperating with investigators. Under a plea agreement, Pamba later admits that he helped move the bodies. He also tells investigators that Mugure threatened to kill him if he ever revealed what had happened. According to Pamba, Joyce's body had initially been wrapped in a gunny bag inside Mugure's house. The 2 children had been placed inside a bathtub. His testimony gives investigators the breakthrough they desperately needed. The following day, November 16th, police accompany Major Mugure to Thigitu Cemetery. Guided by him, they begin digging. Soon they uncover 3 bodies stacked one above the other. The location had not been chosen randomly. According to the prosecution, it had already been identified days before the killings occurred. The chief government pathologist later tells the court that Joyce died from severe blunt force trauma. Both children died from strangulation. No embellishment is needed. The fact speaks for themselves. With the recovery of the bodies complete and forensic examination finished, the investigation enters an entirely different phase. The courtroom. Unlike a police investigation, where detectives build theories and pursue leads, a criminal trial demands proof. Every witness can be questioned, every exhibit challenged, every inconsistency exposed. The issue before the court is not whether suspicion exists. The question is whether the prosecution can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden rests entirely on the state. Prosecutors set out to demonstrate that Joyce Siombua and her 2 children were deliberately killed and that all the evidence consistently pointed to one person. To do that, they present several independent categories of evidence: telecommunication records, DNA analysis, post-mortem examinations, eyewitness testimony, evidence from the recovery of the bodies, and testimony describing the family movement before and after traveling to Nanyuki. Each piece of evidence, prosecutors argue, reinforces the others. If one crucial link breaks, the entire case could weaken.
Kuonyesha venye tulipanga mili hapa kwa gari ikatoshana aje. Mili iliingia tukakunja mili namna hiyo nzuri sana, nimesema kiti ilisonga mbele tukafunika na hii. Hata nikiwa nimeshika hapa hivi.
But if every link holds, a single picture begins to emerge. One witness receives more scrutiny than any other: Collins Pamba. Because he admittedly helped dispose of the bodies, the court approaches his testimony with caution. Courts have long recognized that accomplices may have reasons to minimize their own involvement or shift blame. For that reason, judges always look for corroboration. Does independent evidence support the witness or contradict the account? The prosecution argues that Pamba's testimony matches the forensic findings, the telecommunication evidence, and the circumstances surrounding the recovery of the bodies. The court carefully examines each of these areas before deciding how much weight his evidence deserves. The forensic evidence becomes equally important. DNA testing conclusively identifies all 3 victims. Post-mortem examination established how each of them died. Telecommunications experts reconstruct a detailed timeline using mobile phone records and cell tower data. Unlike human memory, digital records do not forget events or become uncertain over time. The court finds that the phone data is probably broadly consistent with the prosecution's reconstruction of events. Another important link remains intact. The defense, however, strongly disagrees. From the very beginning of the trial, defense lawyers argue that the prosecution has not met the very high legal standard required for a murder conviction. Every accused person enters a Kenyan courtroom presumed innocent. The law never requires an accused person to prove innocent. Instead, it requires the state to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Throughout the proceedings, the defense challenges witness, questions the interpretation of the evidence, and disputes whether the prosecution version of events truly hold together. This process is not a loophole. It is one of the justice system's greatest safeguards. Strong cases become stronger after surviving this level of scrutiny. Weak cases fall apart. One remarkable feature of this prosecution is that much of it relies on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence does not show the crime directly. Instead, it asks the court to draw reasonable conclusion from a series of established facts. Courts have consistently held that where every piece of circumstantial evidence points in the same direction and no reasonable alternative explanation survives, it can be more powerful than even eyewitness. That legal principle ultimately becomes central to the judge's evaluation of the case. Weeks of testimony, hundreds of exhibits, years of investigation, everything now rests on a single question. Has the state eliminated reasonable doubt, or will the accused walk free? Eventually, the trial reaches its defining moment. The investigators have testified. The scientists have explained their findings. The prosecution has presented its case. The defense has challenged every important aspect of it. Now the responsibility belongs to one person, the trial judge. The standard is not proof beyond every conceivable doubt, nor proof beyond public opinion. It is proof beyond reasonable doubt. The court does not examine each individual piece of evidence in isolation. Instead, it asks a broader question. Taken together, does all the evidence tell one coherent story? Or are there gaps large enough for reasonable doubt to remain? A fingerprint alone proves very little. A phone record alone proves even less. A single witness can honestly make mistakes. But when independent forms of evidence all point toward the same conclusion, their combined weight may become impossible to ignore. One by one, the court addresses every major issue raised during the trial. Regarding Collins Pamba's testimony, the judge finds that it is independently supported by forensic and telecommunications evidence. Regarding the digital evidence, the court concludes that it consistently reinforces the prosecution's timeline. Finally, the court considers one of the most significant issues in the entire case. Were these killings planned? Premeditation is rarely established through confession. Instead, court examine conduct, preparation, movements, timing, actions taken before the crime itself. The prosecution points to evidence showing preparation made before Joyce and her children ever arrived in Nanyuki. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge concludes that the killings were deliberate, not spontaneous.
For the record, my name is Major Mugure of the Kenya Defence Forces. Having delivered a verdict of guilt on all 3 counts, I respect that decision of the court.
That finding becomes the central factor to the final judgment. Having considered months of testimony, scientific evidence, digital records, witness accounts, and the applicable law, the court finds Major Peter Mugure guilty of all 3 counts of murder. For Joyce's family, the verdict cannot be undone. The verdict can never undo the loss that they suffered. No judgment ever can. But for the justice system, it represents the conclusion of a lengthy process in which evidence, not speculation, has been thoroughly tested before an independent court. Many people believe the story ends with their conviction. It does not. One final chapter remains: sentencing.
This was infanticide and femicide. These are offenses which have become very rampant in our country, and they call for severe punishment.
Sentencing is different from determining guilt. The facts have already been established. The court must decide what punishment is appropriate and reflects the crimes, taking into account aggravating factors, any mitigating circumstances, and the need to protect the public. The court has already determined that these killings were deliberate and carefully planned. The sentence reflects that conclusion.
I have taken into consideration the heavy words by the accused person, but however, he has not shown any iota of remorse. The offense of murder carries punishment of death. I have gone through the impact assessment report, and the court has taken into consideration of that report. But the murders of the three accused persons I find were barbaric. The prosecution has called for death penalty. I am aware that the Mugure case has not made it illegal, but in the circumstances of this case, and in bearing in mind the time the accused person has been in custody, I sentence him to life imprisonment.
On July 14, 2026, the High Court sentenced Major Peter Mugure to life imprisonment. He received 3 concurrent life sentences, one for Joyce Siombua, one for Shanice and one for Prince Michael. The judge notes that Mugure showed no remorse throughout the proceedings. Although the court considers the years he had already spent in custody, it concludes that this is outweighed by the brutality and calculated nature of the offenses proved during trial. Mugure tells the court that he disagrees with the conviction. He is informed of his legal right to appeal. When cases like these dominate national headlines, public attention often focuses on the accused. The arrest, the investigation, the courtroom, the sentence. But after the cameras leave, families continue with unimaginable loss. Birthdays come and go. School term begins without children who should have been there. Justice and healing are closely connected, but they are not the same thing.
Ile naweza sema mimi nilimsamea mwenye kutenda hicho kitendo, lakini kama mtu siwezi sahau ile tu. Naomba akiwa mahali yako, Mungu amtembelee, sababu Mungu ndiye anaweza samea na sahau.
Perhaps the most unexpected moment comes after sentencing. Joyce Siombua's mother stands before the court. She tells the judge that she has forgiven the man responsible for killing her daughter and her grandchildren. Think about everything this case represents. 7 years of investigation and trial, a seemingly insignificant sewerage register that placed a man at a burial site before anyone knew there would be victims. An accomplice who finally chose to speak, and a grieving mother who chose forgiveness in the very courtroom where a life sentence had just been imposed. This case continues to resonate across Kenya for reasons that extend far beyond one family's tragedy. It involves allegations of intimate partner violence. It involved the death of 2 young children. It involved a serving military officer demonstrating that no rank, no uniform, and no position places anyone above the law. It also demonstrated the extraordinary role modern forensic science and digital evidence now play in homicide investigations, especially where there are no surviving eyewitnesses. Today's homicide investigations increasingly depend on corroboration, not one witness, not one forensic result, but multiple independent sources of evidence, each supporting the others until reasonable doubt has nowhere left to exist. Thank you for watching. If you found this investigation insightful, consider subscribing for more evidence-based examination of criminal cases that have shaped Kenya's history and the courtrooms where they were decided. It is our goal never to sensationalize tragedy. Our goal is to understand how investigations unfold, how courts evaluate evidence, and what these cases teach us about justice, forensic science, and the families who continue living with the consequences. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, behind every case is a human history and a human story.